Hello Steelers, and welcome to this review of Eisenhower, the new Sam Mustapha rules for World War II tabletop game of the great battles of the Second World War. I'll read out the blurb to you in the back. What I'm going to do is here, it's kind of like a review, first view kind of thing, my initial thoughts. I'm going to say here and now, I haven't played this yet. I am planning on playing it because I do like Sam's earlier games. And what I've read so far I've really liked, so that's going to give you a bit of an idea of where this review is going to go, review in inverted commas. But like I say, I haven't played it, so this is based on my reading of the rules and also understanding how other Sam Mustapha games rules works. Let me just quickly read you the back of it so you know exactly where it's coming from. It says, Eisenhower is a tabletop game of the great battles of the European and Mediterranean theatres of the Second World War, so it's very specific in those theatres. Command entire corps and armies as you struggle over the famous battlefields of the war, from North Africa to Russia to France. Choose one of 6 major armies: Britain, France, Germany, Italy, the Soviet Union or the United States. Create battles or fictional scenarios based upon famous historical campaigns. Make decisions that bring tens of thousands of soldiers into action. Eisenhower is played with miniature figures. In addition to this rulebook, you will need models and counters in order to play. All other game information is provided free on the website, obviously sammustapha.com. The basic Eisenhower game can be played by 2 or more players in 2 to 3 hours. The advanced rules introduce air power, naval support, invasions by air and sea, and can accommodate as many players and can be as large as your imagination permits. So far so good. I like high level gaming. I always have done. I've kind of gone skirmish gaming with Chain of Command because it's such a good game, but my heart always started with big gaming and high level things. So Eisenhower immediately speaks to me. Right, before I dive into this, I want to talk a little bit about the book itself. Now, Sam is no longer producing these as he used to do. Let me just show you. I've got Rommel here, and I've also got Blucher, and both of these were in hardback. I don't know if you can get these anymore, but these were hardback editions of both of these rules. Same size as Eisenhower. Are really nice books. The negative part of this is that this is now printed by Amazon. Now, and when it came, I've got to say, compared to the previous Sam Mustapha outputs, I was quite disappointed. It's quite a floppy book. I mean, it's 112 pages, I think, of rules in there. But the cover is it's not great card. The paper itself is not particularly good quality. Again, I'm comparing it to previous games produced by the same games designer. This is not an issue with Sam himself. This is an issue with Amazon. Personally, I don't like Amazon. You could I did look at getting a PDF, because you can get this as PDF, and getting it printed, but the costs were going to be quite the same, and the cost of this was quite a lot of money. It came in about, I think, £35. I did notice the other week that it was not on sale but on offer for about £27, so you could have saved some money there, but you have to go through Amazon to get it, and that to me was slightly disappointing. Now, I can completely understand the whole issue of buying in a load of your hardback books and having to store them, and then also dealing with all the postage and the packing and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's hard enough when I just sell stuff on eBay, so having to send out tons and tons of books to people across the world is going to be quite difficult. And Sam is obviously a full-time professor in the US, so he has a full-time job already, and I know, as my wife is an academic, I know how hard they work and how much time they don't have to do other things. So I completely understand where it's coming from when it comes to be like a print on demand. But I guarantee you that he has probably set the price at so at least he's making some money off it. But he's not going to be making tons and tons of money off this. But I did find that it's a little expensive for the Amazon publishing. What I probably would do is probably buy the PDF, because then I think the money will be going straight directly to Sam rather than going through Amazon, and also then probably printing it. That was just my thoughts. This is probably the most negative thing I could probably say about the game, to be perfectly honest. Right, let's get that out of the way, because that is something that's kind of completely different to the game itself. Let's talk about the game itself. What I'm going to do is I will dive straight into the book and we'll go through it. I'll talk about some of the major things in here and how it's changed quite differently from Rommel, and I'm quite glad to see that it is using an Allied name rather than an Axis name on this one, Eisenhower rather than Rommel, so that's good to see. But in my initial thoughts are, it is a very interesting game. It is a lot smoother than Rommel. There's not the granularity of smaller games. It has been really turned over, and it's made things a lot easier. Sam did actually ask me a long time ago if I'd like to play test. I just couldn't commit time to it, so I've known about this for a while, but I'm glad to actually see it has come to fruition. And he said at the time when he'd introduced me to the playtest, it's similar to Rommel but quite different. There are quite a few changes in this, such as initiative, for example, that don't exist in Rommel, which I really like in this, and I think that's a great thing. It looks great. It's apart from obviously the poor paper it's printed on from Amazon. The photos in there are great, good illustrations. There's some great maps. Sam is a great writer. He's a really good writer of rules. It's very concise. It's to the point. There is no messing about. You know exactly where you stand with it. I will say here and now, if the naysayers want to turn off, you are not going to get to field your favourite tanks in here, or you will do, but they will be very abstract, and also it's played on grids. So if that's killed half the audience, you may as well turn off now, because that's what we're going to be diving into. But it looks lovely. It's really well laid out. It was an easy read. I read it in a couple of nights basically, and as I say, it's concise. There's no waffle in here. It cuts straight to the point. You know exactly where you are. There is also, if I recall correctly, yes, there is an index, which always gets a uptick from me, and a contents page as well, which always gets an uptick. And it looks like a Sam Mustapha game. Right, what I'll do is, as I say, we'll dive straight into it now. We'll have a look at it close up, and I'll go through some of the main aspects of this, and we can have a talk about it from that point of view. Okay, so here is the book front. Let's quickly show you the back as well there. As I said, I already read that out, so you kind of know what the blurb is on the back of it. We just got another very similar picture to Rommel, another design similar to Rommel there. So let's quickly jump in. As I said, we've got the acknowledgements, we've got our table of contents, goes up to 112 pages in total. We've also got frequently asked questions at the back, and also your quick reference sheets, which is what you're expecting as well. Right, first of all, the usual things you're going to get in rules. You've got the what kind of stuff you're going to need to play. In this, we're using ops, we're using counters. So in Rommel, you were using dice for your ops, and you had quite a lot of choices. In this, it's slightly different. You're actually using ops to activate units. We'll talk about that in a second. And then it says here we also have, these are the basic concepts. So it's each player is in charge of a command. Each command compromises between 2 and 6 formations, 6 being the number on your ops sheet. And then each formation has several units, and they are single bases. So basically a base is a battalion. That's what you're down to, really. So as I say, that granularity of other gaming is kind of out of the way, really, at this point. You're not really thinking about what they're doing and are they throwing grenades and that kind of thing as well. Also, it covers the majority of the war as well, and as I mentioned, it does have the 6 different forces, different nations of the early, mid and late wars. So you've got Britain, Commonwealth, Germany, France, Soviet Union, Italy and also United States. I'm sure at some point somebody will do the other areas. There is mention that the Far East doesn't really fall into this kind of gaming. I would argue it probably does. You could probably do the landings in Malaya, for example, with this quite easily if you wanted to, but that's a different argument. Everything is using 6-sided dice, of course. Basically, you have a basic to hit marker, a number, depending on if your unit is fresh, worn or exhausted. And then you also have re-rolls, and all re-rolls, this is an interesting little thing, all re-rolls are successful on a 3-up no matter what, which is quite nice as well. I quite like that. It's an easy thing to remember. So as it says here, a unit is a battalion of infantry or armour, and then you just have them with an ID depending on what formation they are in. And you have the different types of units as well. So let's look at these here, for example. So we got leg infantry, which is an interesting turn of phrase. I would have said foot infantry, but whatever. We also have lorried infantry. Obviously, that's, you know, trucks on, that's motorised trucks. And then we have mechanised armour, and then also armour as well. Mechanised infantry, sorry, and then also armour as well. They're tracked, they're wheeled, they're leg, and they. That depends on how many grid squares you will move with those units. It's generally either 1 or 2, it's not massive. Each unit then also has a step to show what level they're at, and you are one of 3 levels. You are either fresh, which is just, you know, normal. You are worn, which is basically you've been in a fight, and then you are also exhausted, which is the 3rd step. So really, you only have to remember you are, if they're nothing, they're, you know, they're fresh. If then you can put a marker on to show that they're worn. Then you can put 2 markers on to show that it's exhausted. It's quite a simple system and really different, similar in a way to Rommel, but you don't have to keep a track of those numbers that you already had in Rommel. Now, the way it works is you actually have a firepower value, and this is what you need to roll over on your D6s. So for example here, a trained unit will need a 4 up when they're fresh, they'll need a 5 up when they're worn, and then when they're exhausted they need a 5 up, but that's defending. The smaller number here in the 6 is when they're attacking, so that's slightly different. Then a veteran, obviously, just slightly better. So this is really how you work it out. It's quite a nice system, nice and smooth system, just to remember these different versions of different types of units, and also how hard they hit when they do hit. And it just mentions here how to depict those unit conditions. You could do this quite easy just with tokens, just putting, you know, a little token down next to the unit itself just to show it. Talk about the different conscripts, the different traits of the different units. Some of them, this just adds a little bit of flavour. Some armour is superior. For example, tigers, you've got tiger battalion, it becomes superior. It just means that they have they get a bonus in combat. Conscripts, similar, they have shaky morale, and again it's just slightly different. You've got the other stuff, you've got cavalry, tank destroyers, and your infantry support as well. Over here, chapter 3 then talks about the table itself and the grids and how you lay it out. This is fought on a 6x4 table, so you generally will have we'll say 96 squares basically, so that's, you know, your typical game. You can make these squares as big or small as you want. You can make it a much smaller game if you wanted to by just halving the size of the squares just to fit onto whatever you've got. So you could really go down to 3 foot by 4 foot just using, I don't know, 3mm figures or something on smaller bases, but with 3-inch squares. So you can fit this quite easily onto any table. It's really quite flexible in that way, in the similar way that the Rommel was as well. So we've got our setting up and all this kind of stuff. Then we've got the objectives. The one interesting thing is objectives actually move, and they are moved by the defender. So as you are progressing, as you're moving forward, they can actually move them back. So it's forcing the attacker to keep moving forward, and I quite like that. It's flexible objectives. And it's kind of like that, you know, the lines on the map moving when you're watching documentaries, that kind of thing. A discussion here about how units work on the table and where you can move, how you can move, what the different terrain types are. Pretty typical stuff, really. You know, what the effects of that terrain are, and also the different features and things as well. The fact that there's no roads in here. So we have a basic sequence of play, and we start with the morning period, which is when you're going to be doing your fighting, or you're starting, and then you do the rounds, and then you move on to the night period, which is basically a tidy up period for the game. Similar to Rommel, the game has command posts. For these, you have your 6 formations, and you just basically write in what their hit factors are, if they are fresh or if they're worn, and then also how many ops they get. And we'll get to that in a second, because that's the interesting thing. So various bits about setting up here. You might get some artillery dice as well in there. Right, so this is the interesting part of it. It's all about orders. It's all about command, you know. I'm very much a fan of command control and communication versus fog and friction, the 3 C's versus 2 F's, and this is kind of played out here, definitely in this. The way it works is you basically roll for the amount of momentum you get, which are your ops, and then you divide these up into your units. Depending on how many units you have, how many of these formations you have, is how many dice you will roll, and that allocates your ops. You have to give at least 1 op to each of your formations, but then you may have extra ones. So in this example here, they've ended up with 5 ops. So 1 has been given to the 2nd Panzer, there's the 202nd Volksgrenadier, but they've also given 3 over to the 1st Panzer. And this is how you play. You basically play by spending the ops in a round to do whatever it is you want to do in that turn. And this is how the rounds work. And it depends on who holds the momentum who decides whether they go first or second. And this is a change from Rommel. In Rommel, it's basically one player went, and then the other player went, attacker went, then defender went, attacker went, defender went, and it always went through the game. In this one, it may change over, so you may be the strategic offensive player once. Even if you're the strategic offensive player, you may get to go first, but then you may go second in the next turn. So it's quite a nice little system in there just to mix things up a little bit, and it's something that I'm happy to see that I thought was missing from Rommel, so that's quite nice. The area of operations is interesting. It's because every time you spend an op, you basically put it down on a square, and then it encompasses those 9 squares around it, and you can then operate the units of that formation that are in those 9 squares. So some of your squares, so let's have a look at this for example here. So for example, if we put our op on the red tank here, and we were using the black formation, we would only be able to do C, B and D, for example. If we put it down here on B, we could then operate with C, D, B and A. E would be out of it. So it's quite a nice little system. It kind of forces you to keep your formations close together, so you don't want them to get too split up, but also just means that if your forces then are split up, you can still operate them, but you're going to have to spend those ops on them, so it's going to cost you quite a lot in command and communication. And I really like that. I think that's a really, really nice, it's a thing I'm looking forward to actually playing more than anything else on it, because I just think it's going to be quite interesting. And then we just move into the night period. You spend your ops. One person spends an op, and it moves back and forwards between the players until there are no ops left to play. We also have supply as well, and isolation, which I think is going to play a lot more of a part in this than it did in Rommel. In Rommel, it didn't seem to didn't feel much like it was part of the game, but this one, we have a little bit more supply rules than there were in Rommel. Movement, very simple. I'm not going to go too much into this. You basically have 2 types of movement: normal movement and then also transit moves, which is always a feature of Sam's games. So you can move a little bit further as long as you're not within your zone of control of an enemy, for example. And you basically just move into a unit, into an enemy unit, to do the attack on them, and then you move on to the attack. Right. Right, let's jump forward into combat. Combat is quite a nice, simple thing. It has really been fine-tuned down from Rommel. So, for example, you're rolling d6s, and we need those hits to do any damage at all. So as I said before, if you're fresh, you need a 4 up. If you're worn, you need a 5 up. If you're exhausted, you need a 5 up. And basically, infantry units, leg, lorried or mechanised, will roll 2 combat dice if they're fighting in close terrain and 1 in open terrain. Armour are the exact opposite. They use 1 combat dice in close terrain and 2 when in the open. Now, this is the interesting thing, because it's very different to Rommel. Let me just grab Rommel over here, if I can find it. In Rommel, you had the combat grid, which you had to refer to when you were playing the game, and it's quite small here, but I made a bigger one, and it's a really nice grid. It really works, but it means that it takes you out of the game to have to go and look at a chart, and I don't like doing that so much in games. I like to be able to just think about the game as the game plays, and this is really simple. Simplifies it completely down to that, and it's basically you either hit or you don't hit. You may re-roll successes if you're against a prepared defender or in hard terrain. And also, what happens here is very similar to other games I've seen. I'm trying to think which one it is. I can't remember off the top of my head. It may be something like Strength and Honor, but I could be thinking differently. But basically, the first hit is always a single loss, and then each 2 hits after that cause additional losses. So what that means is, if you roll 1 hit, you take they go from from fresh to worn and then to exhausted. So you have to roll 1 dice. If you wanted to cause 2 hits on them, you've got to actually hit them 3 times. So your first hit is your first hit, and then your second 2 hits are your second hit, if that makes sense. But it is quite a simple thing. So to take, to cause 3 hits on a unit, you would have to roll 5 dice. So first hit, second hit, third hit. So that's the way it works. Really simple, really nice, easy to remember, and quite a fast way of doing this as well. And as I say, it doesn't bring you out because you don't have to look at that chart as well on top of that, which is great. And then either, depending on the outcomes of that, if you cause them to go weak, if you cause them to go worn, then they'll stay in the place. If they in the square, if you cause them to go exhausted, they stay in the square. They may retreat, but also if they're exhausted and they hit again, then they're taken out. And you distribute those hits amongst the units that you're attacking, and basically you roll. Both of you roll your dice and just see what the damage is, and then it gives you the outcome as well. Somebody either retreats or somebody stays, and that's pretty much how simple it is. And obviously, if you're sending your worn units into combat, they're not probably going to last very long, so you probably want to be rotating those out with fresh units as you're pushing that attack forward. So quite nice, very simple, and I really like it. This, as I say, I haven't played it yet, so I haven't tried it out, but thinking about it, I think this is going to be a really nice, smooth way of playing this level of game. Then we go into the night period. This is things like, we'll get attrition in here if you are out of, if you've been isolated, for example, you go from fresh to worn, so it's quite simple. And then you can also, this is when I mentioned the objectives as well. So the strategic defender during the night can move any objective that is currently enemy controlled. So basically they just move them back. What you're doing there is you're forcing the attacker to keep pushing forward. And again, this is really nice because it makes it a little bit dynamic. Everyone's not just piling into one single square. You're actually moving forward and forwards and forwards, and always, creating that momentum of these kind of attacks. And I think that's a really nice way of doing things. Again, I've not seen how it plays on the table yet, but I am looking forward to it. Obviously, we've got stuff like our usual reinforcements, that kind of thing, and also just checking if you've got a victory. This is all in the night phase. Next up, we've got stockpiles. This is something else. You will start with a certain amount of stockpiles. It's generally scenario dependent, but you will also get some as well if you're just playing a basic pickup game. And basically what these do is these refresh units that have become worn or exhausted. You basically play them, and they will just have an effect on the units. So that's quite a nice little way of doing things. Again, you can only refresh certain units because you've only got a certain amount of stockpiles, so that's really nice as well. Then we're just going on to the different traits and the effects of those as well. In the advanced game, I'm kind of going to skip through a lot of this because this is typical stuff that you're going to find in World War II games. One of the things here is we have cards, and this adds that little bit of flavour to the game as well. So these are like your ops in Rommel. If you haven't played Rommel, you basically have a certain amount of ops which you can use during the game, and they're kind of like event cards. This is a similar thing. We have event cards here. So depending on your force, you are allowed to take a certain amount of cards at the same. I think you have 3 at the start of the game, but you choose them from a stockpile of card pools, and these can all be downloaded and printed on the Honor website as well. And you just basically play them throughout the game, and they add things. So let me give you an example here. It says, Play at the start. This is a scrounger card. Play at the start of the rally phase before rallying any units. Both sides have the card. The strategic offensive must declare first whether they will use it, and then it just gives you a bit of historical documentary, and then the effect. Anyone supplied worn infantry unit, Lego motorized, on the table becomes fresh again. So, you know, these are just like these little events that you can just chuck in, and again adds that little bit of flavour that probably some people want at this abstracted level of game. So that's the cards as well. We also have air power. Of course, at this level you're going to have air power. It has to be a good weather day, and then barrages as well add on to artillery. Then we talk about creating scenarios here, and just so this is just how to make up scenarios for yourself. And then we've got the army building lists as well. Let's have a quick look through these. So it just explains how these are laid out, how many points each of your units are within formations. You organise them yourself because you're the army commander, and of course, you know, we've got all the different nations here. So this is the British one, for example. We've got early war, mid war, and then late war, and in each one of these you take a division type, so your armoured division, tell you how many types of battalions you can have, the minimum and the maximum, then also the points of them as well, and also how much artillery dice they have each as well, which is an extra dice you get as part of your formations. And then your card pool, as I mentioned, it tells you what kind of cards you can have. You can see here late war, a British can have quite a lot more than the early war. We also have this as well, adjuncts, which shows you can also draw lists from other lists as well. So in this case, the British late war can also draw from the American late war, well, the American late war lists as well. So you can add those in. You don't just have to have a specifically British force. You can also have a British mixed with an American support force, for example. Germany, of course, any extra rules for those as well. Italy, early war and mid war. Soviet Union, early, mid and late as well, and then the United States as well, of course, here. And then we also have some advanced rules as well if you want to add these on. So river crossings are covered in this kind of thing. Fortifications are covered here. They do have prepared positions earlier in the rules, but actual forts and things, if you want to do the attacks on the Belgian forts, for example. Bridging and that kind of thing as well. Minefields, counter-attacks, inferior armour, variations on objectives. And then also we even have, because again of the level of this game, we have invasions. So these are beach landings, amphibious landings. We also have airborne invasions, naval support. All this is covered because, as you would expect as well, in here. And then we talk about multiplayer and club games and just how to play the game at those bigger levels with more people in them. And then almost finally, creating the historical scenarios as well of the game. So this is an example of one here. So this is quite a big one. This is the attack into Operation Epsom, 1944. And this is actually quite a big game. So it's probably not the greatest example, but there is also there are other scenarios that are on the Honor website as well, which are much smaller than this, probably more manageable for most people. This is a particularly big one, as Epsom was, but it kind of just shows you the way of going through making that scenario and taking it from history and plonking it on the tabletop. Then of course we've got frequently asked questions. Anything that may have come up during playtesting has been put here, and then our quick reference sheets, as I mentioned, and finally that index itself. So there you go. That's a bit of a walkthrough of Eisenhower. As I say, I am yet to play it. I'm looking forward to playing it. I've actually ordered a grid mat for playing not just Eisenhower but Rommel as well, and other gridded games. They do exist. I think it's worthwhile. As I say, it was slightly expensive, but I don't mind paying money for rules, because I know, especially if I know that I'm going to keep using them, and I think I will do with this one. I'm looking forward to getting it on the table, and I will make some videos of it at some point in the future. So stay tuned for them, and I will see you in the next Storm of Steel video.